This has been a pretty fantastic day of sessions. I don't know how many folks have been able to attend. And our session will be about a guaranteed income program. And first off, before we can talk about that, we probably should start out by doing some introductions. My name is Gary Hoover. Most people call me Who. I am the executive director of the Murphy Institute for Political Economy here on the campus of Tulane University. I'm also a tenured professor in the economics department and affiliate professor in the law school. So before we jump into the topic du jour, I thought it would be good if I just gave everyone else on the panel a chance to introduce themselves and talk about what brings them here today and what it is that you are doing in your respective locations. I'll just go by the order I see on my screen, and on my screen, that's Jack, who is up first. So Jack, why don't you introduce yourself to folks, and then I guess we can keep going down the line.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. My name's Jack Shavitz. I'm the Deputy Director of Policy in the Mayor Cantrell's office in the Office of Youth and Families, and I'm also the Program Manager for the New Orleans Guaranteed Income Program.
Excellent. The next person that I see is Phaedra. Hey, Phaedra.
Good afternoon. I am Phaedra Robinson. I'm the Director of Operations with Springboard to Opportunities. We are a nonprofit organization in Jackson, Mississippi, focusing on supporting families in affordable housing communities.
Hey, welcome. Next up is Suki. Am I getting it right? If you could tell us where you are, what you're doing, what brings you here today, we sure are happy to have you.
Awesome, thanks. And yeah, hi, my name is Suki Samra. I serve as the Executive Director of Mayors for Guaranteed Income. We serve as a funder, technical assistance provider, and convener in the guaranteed income space. And then before this, led the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, which is the nation's first mayorally led guaranteed income program.
Ah, all right. And last but not least, we have Joshua. Welcome, and why don't you introduce yourself to the folks who are here with us.
Thanks, Hoove, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Josh Cox. I'm a senior advisor to Mayor Cantrell, and along with Jack, I've been working on the MGI pilot and launch here in New Orleans.
Excellent. You know, the easiest way to get into this, and I would like to get a couple of answers to this but we won't have an order of things, just let the conversation flow naturally. But most often people ask, what is a guaranteed income program? Before we can talk about its merits and we can talk about the ins and outs of it, probably the easiest thing to do is just to say, what is that thing? What are we talking about? So anybody in particular want to jump in and then we can get multiple perspectives on it. So who wants to go first and dig into this a little bit? Not everybody all at once. You're scaring me.
I'll go, Gary. It's not an issue. So a guaranteed income program is simply a program which provides cash disbursements to an identified group of people. And we're hearing more about it now, but this is something that's been around in American history for a long time, especially looking back at the Black liberation movements. We saw cash disbursements being given to families who were struggling during the civil rights movements and before. And it's an effective way to pull people out of poverty.
Interesting. Anybody want to add to that? Jump in. Go for it.
I think just adding on to what Phaedra said, it's the sort of defining factor that it's unconditional cash. There's no work requirements, no strings attached, and that it's on a monthly basis. So it's a recurring monthly cash payment, no strings attached, that folks can spend it as they want to. And with at Mayors for Guaranteed Income, we see it as a tool for racial and gender equity, and also as a way to close the income gap.
Interesting. This isn't getting started. Is anybody else wanting to add to what they would have as the definition of this? Are these guaranteed income programs generally government-led? Is that your understanding of how these generally work, or what do you think about that? How, if I were to just ask a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of it, what do you think?
I guess I could take that one and maybe hand off to
Sure.
Suki too. Yeah, I think there's definitely some programs that have, significant government involvement, but I think they obviously rely on community support. Our program here in New Orleans, we rely on 9 community organizations who are providing referrals to the program and helping with case management and getting the young people to their onboarding sessions. We're also working with our United Way on benefits counseling. So here our program, is run by our office, but definitely is a, heavily relies on community-based organizations to actually implement it and operate it.
Interesting. Jack, let me follow up with that just for a second and ask you, you used the term young people. Is that something specific? Do you see that as being something for young people? Anyway, what do you think when you said that?
Yeah, so our program in New Orleans is targeting opportunity youth. So youth who are ages 16 to 24 who are disconnected from work and school for a variety of reasons. So kids who are system involved or, might, for a variety of reasons, but, not connected from work and school. So we are, I think, one of the only cities, specifically targeting and Suki's nodding your head. So I think targeting people under 18. I know some other cities like Louisville are targeting 18 plus, but I think we're the only cities targeting, minors, people under 18.
Is that about the same? Oh, I'm sorry, Josh, I cut you off.
No, well, the only thing that I was going to add, it was actually a response to your previous question about UBI and government involvement.
Sure.
One of the things that I just wanted to add is that, I think this program and the launch of these small pilots across the country is exciting because, there's a lot of risk for governments executing on these types of programs with public money before the public can actually see the value or see the impact. And so one of the things that we're hoping is that, if when we're able to launch, well, we are launching right now, but, as time passes and young people are experiencing the benefits of UBI, that it can become something that's much more palatable and sort of acceptable for a government to do.
That's an interesting point. So it doesn't have to be, it can be a government and private sector partnership to run these programs, perhaps. Phaedra, is that how yours in Jackson, Mississippi is running now?
No, actually, we are a nonprofit, and our program is funded by private donors and foundation dollars. And primarily, we started more with on the foundation side, but now we are using private donations to fund our program.
Could I get you, since we're on this, and this is free flowing, can you talk a little bit about the size of your program as opposed to what we've seen in other places? What can you say to that?
Sure. So our program, we primarily work within 4 affordable housing communities across the city of Jackson. So we started this in 2018, and our first cohort of mothers consisted of 20 mothers selected at random through a lottery process. We have some basic requirements that they be between the ages of 21 and 45 and have a child under the age of 18 in the household with them. So we take all of those who qualify and we randomly select them. Our second cohort of mothers, we had 110 to participate, and we just finished our 3rd session of MMT moms, and we have 100 women who participated in that one. And so we're excited to say that we're about to start our 4th iteration of the program. this coming May. So we typically want to stay around that 100 member participation per cohort. So we feel like that gives us greater access to help more people, and it also helps on the research component as well, to have larger groups work participating in the programs.
Suki, is that typical? Is what Phaedra described typical of programs, or are there some other varieties that take place? Could you speak to that, Brad?
Sure. It varies. So we at Mayors for Guaranteed Income, we have 72 mayors, about a third of whom are running pilots. And it just really varies depending on the amount of resources that folks are able to bring to the table, and whether or not they're fully philanthropically funded or leveraging some combination of the two. So a lot of our pilots, including the one that I ran in Stockton, was about 125 people. But then you have larger pilots in places like Newark, New Jersey, Los Angeles City, Oakland, California, that range somewhere from 500 to 1,000 people. And that's just a product of, specifically in LA City, they were able to leverage about $40 million of ARPA funding, so the American Rescue Plan Act and funding from that. So, and most of them are usually just one cohort, again, a product of funding. And because our specific goal at MGI is to ladder up to federal policy. So rather than sort of continuing cohorts, using the data, building the evidence base like Josh was talking about, and making the pitch that this should be federally funded, should be something that's permanent, not something that relies on local government coffers, and not something that relies on philanthropy to sustain.
Well, Jack, Josh, what about what's going on around our part of the woods as it relates to what you've just heard from the others?
Yeah, sure. So our program, we have 125 participants in ours, and they're receiving $350 a month for 10 months. And I think, just going on that, I think, ours was obviously funded through Mayors for Guaranteed Income. So we, had to balance, I think, targeting more people with the amount of funding. So it's, that they're each receiving. So it's definitely a balance between those two. You obviously can provide it to more people, but then they're getting less money. So we kind of hit this, I think, good middle ground around that. So that they'll receive, $3,500 total.
Josh, did you have something to add to that? No? Is that about the nature of the program?
Yeah, no, Jack nailed it.
Okay.
Our goal was to try to touch young people who we know experienced increased disconnection during the pandemic. I mean, if you've sort of spoken to teachers or principals in high schools, here in New Orleans, they were having a hard time, getting kids to not only show up to Zoom, but to even reach out via phone or other methods. And so, part of the way we were thinking about using this money was as a way to, get young people reconnected to organizations, whether it's, a nonprofit or a school, but some organization that can help them ladder into either a job or continuing their education.
That brings up a question that, and for full disclosure, I sent these folks these questions beforehand, so I'm not hitting them right out of the blue. What separates a guaranteed income program like this from an income maintenance program like a welfare or something like that? What distinguishing features makes this type of efforts different? Anybody can jump in.
One of the things that attracted us to the Guaranteed Income Program was the unrestrictedness of the program, that you can give people money and allow them to make decisions about how best to use those funds, unlike you see in most welfare programs where they are very paternalistic in giving direction and restrictions on how those funds or resources can be used. Another factor that we really liked about this is that it is one amount given to everyone in the class. So it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status or the size of your family. everyone receives the same amount of money to be used how they see best for their families. And that, of course, has an impact on communities and how people feel about receiving those dollars. In the Deep South in particular, when welfare reform happened and the states were able to to change regulations around safety net programs and welfare programs, they became very punitive and very restrictive. And so having a program like this that removes a lot of those barriers for people accessing this money, these resources, is extremely, extremely critical because we find that it offers a lot more support in a lot more meaningful ways than you find with a lot of the programs that provide funds from through welfare programs.
Would you folks agree with that, or something to add to that? That
Yeah,
assessment?
I would definitely agree. So as Josh said, we started onboarding actually this week, and we had an onboarding session last night, and a young person said, asked, do I have to do community service? And we were like, no. And then on Tuesday, we actually onboarded at a school, and someone said, well, do I have to start attending this school now? And we were like, no, of course not. So I think there's definitely, just like a shifting of the type of programs like SNAP or TANF, where we, create these administrative burdens, whether it's you have to file paperwork every 6 months, right? Or you have to have work requirements, right? The unconditional nature of the guaranteed income programs, I think, allow people to access them a lot easier than other typical welfare programs.
Okay. More to the.
Can I also add, folks are asking in the chat how were recipients selected.
Sure.
So we worked with community-based partners to basically give us referrals that, those individuals that were referred for consideration filled out a survey, and then the survey results were randomly selected by Center for a Guaranteed Income. And so the individuals who were randomly selected are the ones who ended up getting, being a part of this UBI pilot. Is there something else I should add, Jack, around specificity on that, or?
No, yeah, I mean, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question in and of itself, and I see the chat's filling up, but we'll get to those towards the end of the discussion. One of the, we're talking about who and also how these programs are implemented around the country. But what will happen to individuals after the programs are over, right? Because we know that at least these pilots won't be sustained. Any aftercare thought given? That wasn't one of my pre-prepared questions, just something that came up from thinking about this. Anybody has any thoughts on how to address those?
Well, we're offering, financial. First of all, we're offering benefits training for each individual who's joining our group. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's up to them whether they want to take it or not, but the idea is that we don't push individuals off the benefits cliff by giving them this UBI opportunity. The second piece is that we're offering, financial literacy training. Again, it's optional. There's no requirement, but we hope that, this would be a stepping stone for folks to get more included into the financial economy. So that includes bank accounts, understanding hopefully how to begin to build credit, et cetera. And I think the third piece is actually the underlying reason why we chose this group and why we went about the pilot the way we did. We hope that afterwards they're connected to an entity, and not whether it's one of our nonprofit partners or a school, that can help get them back on the conveyor belt. Because remember, the main criteria for why they were chosen is that they're in some way disconnected from work and school. They were connected, and then at the time of taking the survey, they were not. And so we're hoping that this brings them back into the fold and can create that long-term connection that's needed to see them, into the next 5 years and into a career that makes sense for them.
Well, that brings me to the question that I think Suki probably is, able to address. Is this scalable? Is this something, or even as you mentioned, I wrote this down in my notes that you talked about trying to scale this up on the national level. Can you speak to that? What do you even mean by that? And these types of programs in general. If we're not talking about a welfare program, which was a question I asked before, you know, people are on welfare and then they're released from welfare, SNAP, TANF, WIC, other forms. What are you talking about on a national scale?
Sure. So our goal is a federal guaranteed income. So we do believe that this is scalable. And I think the biggest sort of test case proof of concept for that has been the child tax credit that we unfortunately let expire. But what we saw with the child tax credit that was passed a couple months ago as part of the pandemic relief is that it's effectively a guaranteed income for folks with families. It was about $300 per month coming to families every month, just by virtue of having a child. Cash was unconditional, no strings attached. And we sort of the incremental approach to getting to a guaranteed income is through reforms like making the earned income tax credit monthly, expanding it, broadening it, making sure that states have it. Only some states have a earned income tax credit. California is one of them, but not too many of them have a state version to supplement the federal guaranteed income. But long-term, our goal is a federal guaranteed income policy. Again, similar to a child tax credit, it's something that is in the hands of families every month, funded and supported by the federal government.
And for Jack, Phaedra, and Josh, would you think that your programs for the cities, the two cities that you represent, could be scalable up to the state level before Suki jumps in and gets it up to the national level? What do you think?
I absolutely believe that it could. I'm sorry, Josh. In our case, we believe
Go ahead, Phaedra, go ahead.
that it would be. One of the key components that we focus on in this is research. We're constantly talking to the mothers that we're working with, finding out what's working, how are they using the money, what are better ways that we can support them beyond just giving them cash disbursements, and finding out what's really working. And in a state like Mississippi, we find that more support is always needed. We need a lot of changes to a lot of these safety net programs that we currently have in place. And the Magnolia Mothers Trust is a program that could be used statewide to have a huge impact on families all across our state. And we absolutely would love to see that and be a part of that conversation, and love to show what the data has proven through the implementation of this program. Josh,
you were going to say something, and then you and Phaedra crossed each other.
Yeah. No, I mean, the only thing I was going to add is that, you know, I'm not optimistic, right? I mean, we live in Louisiana. You know, our legislature is not particularly fond of New Orleans, and we deal with a lot of just regular challenges to getting money that we're owed. Like a perfect example of this is that during COVID, during the first iteration of the CARES Act, the city of New Orleans was promised from the Treasury and the state that we'd be reimbursed $70 million that we spent in money on first responders and in other costs responding to the pandemic. When the disbursement came from the feds through the state, we were stiffed out of that $70 million and we still haven't received it. So I say all that to say that, you know, while we hope that we can get to a place where we can demonstrate, you know, impact, you know, we also have to fully recognize the context that we're in. And so I'm hoping that the federal government can really make headway on this, because I think for some of us who are stuck in states with legislatures like ours, it's going to be far more challenging to get additional much needed resources to be able to scale this. And that's just, it's not rosy, but it's honest.
And Suki, is that why you think that a federally mandated program was probably in trying to have these pilots in cities scaled up to states, and then it's probably best to use these pilots and the data to go directly to a federal program, you think?
Yeah, and we also know, I mean, any extension of the social safety net has happened at the federal level. When we think about Social Security, when we think about healthcare, that's where the money is, that's where the dollars are. Federal government can operate in a deficit, whereas states have to balance their budgets. And so for a whole bunch of reasons, both sort of philosophical and also just technical and logistical, it makes the most sense for the federal government to be stepping in here.
Great. I have a difficult question for all of you now. So if I'm understanding the programs right, unconditional cash payments for a period of time to a family, right? Unconditional. And that's what was going on in the Stockton program and in other pilots, right? If someone's selected, they don't have to do anything, they receive these payments. What's the stop? And critics would say, well, you're giving these people these unconditional monies, two-part question. What's to stop them from then engaging in revenue generating activities, right? If I'm getting this money for free, I won't work or engage in revenue generating activities. And more so, what's to stop me from just taking the money and going out and buying a bunch of beer and cigarettes and just living it up? Hard question, but it's going to be asked, and we might as well address it here and now. All of you should take a whack at this one. Who wants to go first? Josh wants to go first.
So, I mean, I'd start by pointing to actually the survey or the work that was done in Stockton. You know, research suggests that when you give folks, you know, unconditional cash payments, they spend it on things like groceries. And so it circulates back into the economy in ways that demonstrate that people actually aren't getting their base needs met. Similarly, I think we can look no further than the child tax credit that Suki mentioned earlier. A majority of those dollars were spent on vital basic things. They were not spent on, you know, on booze and drugs. I mean, there was actually an NPR story that was done on this maybe 2 days ago. And obviously, you know, the vignettes were limited, but it demonstrated the impact that the monthly child tax credits payments were having in people's lives and the stress, the corresponding stress of not having those dollars, that it was wreaking havoc on their families. And so, you know, I would start by saying that's just not supported by the data. But the second thing that I would also say is that, you know, there are administrative costs and downsides to the way that we do benefits right now as a country. You know, for every dollar that you spend on housing or on WIC or on TANF, you know, there's a corresponding amount of capital that needs to be spent to administer the program. And that administration is actually just fundamentally based on a lack of trust in people. You believe that there needs to be this administrative apparatus in order to prevent fraud. And so, you know, what we're hoping that this work shows is actually that, like, if you trust people, 9 times out of 10, you know, more often than not, they're going to spend the cash in ways that advance their long-term goals and actually end up taking them out of poverty in a way that's far cheaper and far more efficient than the current system that we've got.
Adrian, you want to add anything?
Sure. I completely agree with Josh on that. And I would say, you know, we will never silence all the critics out there on guaranteed income. We just never will. And we don't believe that, you know, this in and of itself is a silver bullet to solve all of the issues dealing with impoverished communities. But we do know that it works and it works well. Just in looking at our data, from the 2 years that we've completed evaluation, we've seen these mothers with a $12,000 a year investment pay off over $10,000 in predatory loans, not prime loans. These are truly predatory loans. We saw them increase from 27% to 83%, being able to pay their bills consistently on time. We've seen improvements in credit. We've seen these ladies go from living in affordable housing to being homeowners. So we have seen a lot of very positive transitions happen because of the investment in them. And we don't just provide the funds, the money, we also provide some wraparound services. We offer financial literacy, we offer home ownership workshops. We do a 2-generation approach. So for those who are coming into our program, we invest $1,000 seed into the state's 529 college savings programs for each of their children. And we teach them how to manage that and how to grow that, so that this is not just a one-time temporary fix. We try to give them tools that they can use going into their futures to really change and improve their outcomes. And as I said, we are not, I won't sit here and say that, we have seen the same with 100% of our participants. What I can say is that the vast majority of the mothers that participate in our program have all improved their lives in some manner. And many of them took what was a temporary windfall and really turned it into a lifestyle and a life change for themselves and their children. And they have moved out of communities that they no longer wanted to be a part of and into better areas for their children, into better schools. And so I think the more we do programs like this, the more stories like that we will hear and the more we will see in communities across this country.
Fantastic. Jack, Suki, what do you got for this? This is just fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add. I just say, I think we also create, an economic system, where the prevailing wage does not cover the minimum basic cost of living. I think in Orleans Parish, in New Orleans, around 60% of households, something like 55, don't make enough money to cover, the basic minimum household survival budget. So I think, when we're creating that kind of economic system where the prevailing wage, you can't meet your basic living expenses, I think it's up to, these type of programs to ensure that we can, people have a minimum, basic living standard and can cover their expenses of housing and childcare and transportation and education.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to what folks have already said, other than part of our work at MGI is disrupting the very narratives and myths that lead to folks thinking that unconditional cash is going to be spent on drugs and alcohol. It's a myth that comes from somewhere. It's rooted in racism, it's rooted in sexism. So really being intentional through our pilots and the work that we're doing to not only build an evidence base, but also really shift the cultural narrative, change hearts and minds as we go along the way through projects like documentaries, through projects like photojournalism, et cetera.
Pedro, did you say that a $12,000 investment, I wasn't sure I got this right, $12,000 investment got $10,000 worth of predatory paid off, or was it the other way? Was it 10 for 12 or was it 12
Correct.
for 10?
So the ladies received, the first cohort, well, all of them received $1,000 a month. So it's a $12,000 annual investment into these mothers and their families. Yes. And as you know, in our state, particularly in Jackson, we have a very high number of predatory lending institutions in these communities, payday loans, car title loans, and a lot of these mothers were trapped in those small, high-cost loans. And as a result of receiving the Magnolia Mothers Trust funds, they were able to pay those loans off and walk away from those predatory institutions.
Me as an economist, I would find, we call that an ROI, the return on investment.
Yes.
That type of ROI, right, makes you a CEO of some type of Fortune 500 country. That's absolutely outstanding. Let me ask you, everybody, if anybody wants to jump on to this. This is probably something that everybody can jump onto, but how did you go about, and this was one of the questions in the chat, how did you go about the selection of participants? And I would like to add to that my own. How leery were participants in being told Here is an unconditional cash payment. As I think it was Josh said, people, or it might have been Jack, what do I have to do? You tell them nothing. Yeah, but what do I really have to do? You tell them nothing. But well, yeah, but then, okay, what does nothing mean? How'd you go about selecting folks, and how was their initial response? Anybody, everybody?
Sure, yeah, I can give a little background on that. I think, in terms of our population, which is I think a unique population, I think part of that came from, our mayor, Cantrell, is definitely very focused on supporting young people. Both my office and Josh's office have multiple, separate programs specifically focused on this population. So that's something that, we've been focused on. As Josh mentioned, we partnered with 9 community organizations purposefully because they have much better relationships with the population that we're targeting than us as a city agency. So we were really intentional about ensuring that the organizations that young people are connected to are the ones that are reaching out. We definitely had some, I think, hesitation around just not really believing that it was real. Even so, even once they filled out the initial survey, I think, as I said, we had someone yesterday who didn't really, still didn't know if it was real when they came to the onboarding. So as I said, we really partnered and relied on those community organizations to refer young people to the program. And then, as Josh said, they were randomized by Center for Guaranteed Income.
Right, for our program, we are a little different because we work with mothers in affordable housing communities. So our process was slow going in the beginning because we have to deal with the fact that our families are living in subsidized housing, and an increase in income means an increase in how much they have to pay for rent and other programs that they rely on to take care of their families. And so when we initially had the conversation, it was a dream. It was just, yeah, that would be great, but it will never happen. So it did take some convincing that we are really working to bring this to fruition. And it started in 2016, 2017, and it was 2018 before we could launch our first program. And the way we do it, we're in affordable housing communities. We find all the names of ladies who are between the ages of 18 and 45 with at least one child under the age of 18 living with them. And from that pot, we then create a lottery system that where they're randomly selected. So we don't have any say-so in who participates in the program. It's generated through a computer database, and we take those names and notify those ladies that they have in fact been selected to participate for that particular cohort.
Suki,
Yeah, I'll just add, in Stockton, we also did a random selection. We did address-based sampling. So our eligibility criteria were really simple. People had to be 18 years of age or older and live in a neighborhood where the average median income was below $46,000, which is the city's AMI. And then from there, we randomly selected about 4,000 households that met that criteria, sent them a letter inviting them to participate. Of the people that responded, we randomly assigned them to our treatment group or control group. And then just touching on your other question of how did people respond, with a lot of disbelief and shock. I think when you're working with any of the communities that we're working with, historically marginalized, disinvested in, you have a lot of people who don't believe that government's willing to give them something for nothing in return. All of their sort of interactions with government have been marked by bad things happening. And so just a lot of disbelief that the cash was actually going to continue for the 24 months, that they weren't going to have to give it back in some way, shape, or form. And it took about 5 or 6 payments before people actually believed that the program was here to stick, that we didn't want anything in return and that we meant what we said. But took a lot of sort of relationship and trust building at the front end to actually get people to believe that we were real, we weren't a scam, and we weren't, again, just weren't going to be extractive.
Suki, go back to you for a second. You said the AMI, which was average mean or median, mean or median, I'm sorry. It makes a difference.
Median.
Right. So that meant that conceivably someone in that area with an income above the median, and for those of us who forgot our high school statistics, median just says you take all of the people and you find out where the middle is. Half are above this number and half are below. That's the median. So there's the possibility that some people in your sample were above the median. Was that possible?
It was possible, and I think we had one or two households that did end up sort of being above the AMI, and we knew that that was going to happen. I think for us, when we were deciding on the eligibility criteria and making it be neighborhood specific rather than household specific, because we were the first, we did this in a radically different world. We did this back in 2017, 2018. It was important to us that we sort of took the approach of targeted universalism, trying to direct the resources to people who needed them the most, but still striking that sort of balance of people feeling like no matter how much they made, no matter who they were, they could be eligible if they were in the same neighborhoods. Though I will say, I think what we saw and what we see in a lot of our cities is that there is sort of a self-selection bias in terms of who's going to complete the letter, who's going to respond to a citywide sort of application call. If you're well off, you're probably not as, in tune. Like as someone who has the privilege of not relying on government resources, of not having to sort of use those, I don't know what the eligibility criteria is in the same way that someone who is low income, who doesn't have those same privileges might. And so really seeing that self-selection bias continuing on here too, where the data showed us that the average household income for our seed recipients was about $1,300 a month. So really folks who are in need, folks who are making less than 40K a year.
And that was the reason why, because that question's come up a couple of times about why do the randomization, right? Phaedra spoke to the randomization. I think I heard Jack say that. You do the randomization, why, right? I know, but just to make sure that everyone listening is clear. Somebody, why did we randomize? Why didn't we just give it to everybody and just be done with it?
I guess there might be probably two aspects. One is, our program and a lot of other pilot programs are conducting an evaluation, a research evaluation. So a lot of them are randomized controlled trials where obviously, the central premise is that randomized from a research perspective, but I also think there's obviously a randomizing it is from a fairness perspective, ensuring that, the people who are apply for the program, that no one person, or individual in the city or the nonprofit is like picking, specific people, but just making it completely random ensures fairness.
Was that the case with you folks too, Paige? That you just wanted to?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, it makes sense, right? If you think about medicine, you have to have a treatment group and you have to have a control group to see if there's some type of placebo effect going on. And that's the last time you will hear me use the word placebo effect during this conversation today. But we do have to have some type of controls that take place. But Phaedra, you said that yours had been going on for 4 cycles.
We're about to start our 4th cycle, yes.
And Josh and Jack are in the
First
getting ready to fight. How is the pandemic throwing a big whammy into all of this? That's a question that's come up in the chat, and it's something that was in my mind. And for Suki, yours was finished before the pandemic started, right? No.
Ours was started 2019, ended 2021. So our first year was pre-pandemic, second year was right in the midst of it.
Impacts of the pandemic on all of the programs, on the need, on the, how did the pandemic impact everybody?
Yeah.
Well, I think I can. Oh, go ahead, Phaedra. You got it.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
So I think for us, the pandemic actually was, foundational in determining where we wanted to drive the resources. We knew that, like I mentioned earlier, that young people were more disconnected from not just school, but other institutions, whether it's church, whether it's their rec league teams, whether it's, they played travel football or basketball. And so young people were struggling during the pandemic. And, the thing that we were and are most afraid of is having, a generation of young people who, have just been sort of lost to the pandemic. And so to directly answer your question, the pandemic is the reason why we chose the target population that we did.
Excellent.
For a lot of our families, our MMT payments became supplemental, became income for those who lost jobs or those who had to transition to staying home with kids because of the shutdown, and they couldn't work from home. They didn't have jobs that would permit that. So these cash payments became their only financial resource in their households. And for others who were able to continue to work, we found that they were more intentional about how they used the resources that they received through the MMT program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jack, were you going to jump in? Suki, can you, in your data, because you're finished, right? In your analysis, was there any distinguishing characteristics between the pandemic folks and the not? Because yours is the only one that really overlapped. Yeah, sort of overlapped both, but did anything pop out of that or was striking to you?
We have not released our pandemic data yet. We'll be releasing that in May. So our research team is currently in the process of doing we've seen some of the quantitative numbers. We're in the process of, since there's also a qual component, so we're doing a mixed methods integration right now. So we'll be able to answer that question in a couple months.
Mm-hmm. What about this? And this question is in the chat. This was a question I gave you folks. If we did, let's say we scaled this thing up, right? What's the cost of doing this as opposed to the income maintenance programs that we do now, the SNAP and the WIC and TANF and, these other programs, So basically that's it, right? What do you think would be the cost as opposed to having something like a UBI as opposed to the maintenance programs that exist? And anybody can feel free to jump in on this.
Hey, Hoove. So I see the question from Steve, and I think his question was talking about UBI creating inflation, and so I'll try to answer both questions.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, and I just got a 5-minute warning. Oh no, the Q&A begins then. Well, we're already Q&A. So go ahead, Josh. We're Q&A.
I think one of the misnomers is that this money isn't going into the economy right now. So like I mentioned earlier, for every dollar that's spent on a benefit, whether it's SNAP, WIC, TANF, housing voucher, there is a corresponding administrative cost for delivering that dollar. And so the idea that inflation is caused by this amount of money being in the economy seems to forget about the idea that you've got to administer these programs, and it's much more expensive. And so I think one of the things that's actually exciting about UBI is that there's a tremendous opportunity to actually deliver the same amount of financial or even less benefit per person, because you're doing it by offering each individual far more flexibility in how they spend their funds. And here's like an on-the-ground example. So let's say I'm getting 3 benefits. Let's say I'm getting, a housing voucher, I'm getting SNAP benefits, and what's another benefit that I can't think of? Let's just say benefit 3. The aggregate cost of delivering the benefit to me, let's say it's $100, and let's say that the benefit that I'm getting is, $150. So that's a total of $250. But because I know my situation way better than the government does, I know that, it might not be awesome, but I could potentially move in with a neighbor or with a family member for 3 months, and I can instead use whatever the money that could have been spent on housing, I could put it towards paying for my college education or, getting this certification that would then allow me to get a job. Like, I would submit to you that allowing the individual the freedom to use the housing voucher in a short-term context on something that's going to get her off of him off of needing assistance long term, that the government should actually be promoting that. And so, you know, I know there's a little bit of a long-winded answer, and I'm bringing it to a close, but flexibility actually allows people to be able to make judgments like that I think will ultimately get them out of poverty and allow them to actually meet their needs and truly be included in the economy.
Good answer. Phaedra, Jack, you wanna?
I concur with Josh. He said it was a long answer, but it was a great answer, because, you know, there are over 120 government programs that are considered safety net programs that are hundreds of billions of dollars annually. So if we could take a portion of that and transition that to guaranteed income, I do think you will see greater outcomes. The fact that so many of these programs are so inflexible that people can't make decisions, and you have to go back to get recertified or have meetings and conversations with people every time there's some sort of change in your household, makes it a very difficult program to manage, and it makes it difficult for people to I think, really engage in them and get the full benefit of it, because nobody wants to go and have that conversation every time I get a 10-cent raise on my job, that I have to now do another report and go and have another certification process. So they become so burdensome because of all the bureaucracy. I think it makes it a couple of things. One, a lot more expensive to manage, and two, makes it more difficult for people to change their mindset when they're trying to overcome the situation that put them in these affordable housing communities or in the purview of these safety net programs.
Excellent. Jack, Suki, you want to jump in on that one? Because the next question is coming to Suki anyway. So from the audience, we've been questioning and answering, but we shall question and answer a little bit more. Are there rural communities that are piloting guaranteed income programs?
Not that I know of off the top of my head in terms of like a rural city. I will say most of MGI's cities are sort of the big cities that you think of. The sort of opportunity to expand into rural communities comes with some of the statewide work. So in California, last year, in the governor's budget, there was a $35 million allocation for guaranteed income pilots. So they are currently in the process of, they just issued an RFP for local communities to submit for a funding match. And because it's a statewide sort of funding allocation, and the Governor Gavin Newsom specifically has an emphasis on sort of closing the coastal versus inland California divide, there's opportunity there to start piloting in more rural areas. And the other one is a pilot in Georgia called In Her Hands, run by Give Directly in partnership with sort of the old Fourth Ward and their findings from a task force that they had run for a couple of years. That is also going to be statewide with an emphasis on mothers, and I think particularly Black mothers. And that will also expand into sort of rural areas as well. So we see that more with the statewide effort. And I think part of the reason that it hasn't expanded into rural communities, it comes back to this resources question of, in rural communities, they're smaller, there are less resources that are directed. And so folks are sort of fighting already for the basics, and adding a guaranteed income pilot on top of that just tends to be harder.
Phaedra, how far out is your program strictly Jackson City, or is it touching a rural part, or is it strictly urban, I guess?
No, actually, our program is based in Jackson. We do have program support in other areas of the state, but the funds that we've generated are specifically for the Jackson area.
Okay. And I'm assuming that Josh and Jack, what we're talking about here is Orleans Parish and inside of New Orleans itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Another question, and I'm going to add to it. And this question came up before, but I'm going to enhance it a little bit. Is the guaranteed income tax, but more so, and Phaedra talked a little bit about this. is the guaranteed income, at least in its pilot program, taking away, drawing down from other government benefits, so that if I receive the UBI money, will then my WIC be cut correspondingly? Or, and I think someone brought this up, this puts me into a higher income class and now I'm not eligible for this, or, by accepting the UBI, free lunch at school I'm no longer eligible. So basically, the trade-offs, right, of the UBI programs in wider sense, or for Suki, or in the more specific city senses for Pedro and Jack and Josh. Anybody can jump on that.
Sure. I mean, I think so, to the first question about the income being taxed, so the IRS considers up to, if you get a gift up to, I think it's $15,000, that income is considered gift and is not taxable. On the benefit side, I think each pilot city is working to provide benefits counseling, which I think really kind of consists of two components. The first is working with state and local agencies to receive waivers where applicable. For example, we worked with our state agency called DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, which actually exempts any research funded programs from counting towards income. And then on the other side of the coin is, for example, is really providing the counseling to participants. So, ensuring that they, asking them what benefits they have and then going through each one. And, if there is one, for example, whether it's WIC, as you said, or Medicaid that might be impacted by the income, ensuring that the individual, is aware of that so they can do a cost benefit analysis. And if they feel like, they'll lose that benefit and they don't want to do that, making sure they do have that knowledge and can potentially withdraw from the program so they have informed consent.
Similar to Jack, we do a session with all of our incoming moms to let them know that this will result in some increases or reduction of services. What we found is that the net gain, though we issue checks for $1,000, the net gain is about $600 to $700 a month once those adjustments happen. And we do have people who opt out because of that. So we do issue 1099s to our participants, which was very different from what they were used to getting. So we've had some discussion around that, what it means, and instructing them on how to ensure that that is captured in any tax filings that they do. Yes. Which is so unfortunate, quite frankly.
Suki, in the program that you, at the Stockton program, had more state partners so that benefits were more exempted or than the other two programs we just discussed. Is that true? No? Yes?
To some extent, we were able to get a waiver for CalWORKs, TANF. And then because of the sort of gift classification of the payments, we were able to get it to not, in sort of consultation with our county public health officials, get it so that it was exempt from certain benefits. And then we did the benefits counseling and the hold harmless fund. And this is where, I mean, it's unfortunate that benefits are so hyper local sometimes. And it really depends on how sort of agreeable, amenable your state and local governments are. So that's why guaranteed income movement has proliferated so much in California, because there's a lot of support at the local and state level, whereas in other places, it's been a little bit harder because that same support doesn't exist.
Is that what you're going to add, Josh? I think I looked like you were going to say something, but I don't know if I cut you off.
No. That's it. I mean, it truly depends on, what kind of state legislature you've got. And, I think it also just depends on whether people see the value in it. And by people, I mean citizens see the value in it. And, there's an education process, there's a learning curve. But I think, that's why we got to run these pilots to be able to begin to make the case that, hey, maybe it's worth spending public money on this.
It's interesting you say that, Josh, because that's the next question that came up, and it's in the chat here. Has anyone explored whether voters might support guaranteed income programs? If so, what have they found, right? So basically, what you just talked about, Josh, using the data that's generated by these programs to then be able to inform constituencies, and then they're more amenable to having this as a broader program. Anyone can speak to that yet, or is it too early in the programs to have gotten any feedback from not participants, but from the general voting public?
So MGI did a poll in partnership with Data for Progress last July that showed that a majority of voters support guaranteed income. And that number was about included about two thirds of independent voters, and was especially high amongst Black and Latinx voters. So again, we do see that a majority of folks supported this. And I think a large part of that, sort of going back to a thread from earlier in this conversation, was because of the pandemic. It sort of showed and shone a spotlight on how much folks were struggling, and how even folks who didn't think they were vulnerable found themselves in a position where they were. So we have the public support, but like anything else in sort of the public or sort of the political atmosphere that we're in right now, moving from public support and translating that into policy has proven difficult, but it'll be an uphill battle.
Stay with me, Suki, because the next question is going to go back to you and to Phaedra. It just popped up, and I know it's true, so I'm just going to give you a chance to answer it, and then I'm going to act like I'm a genius because I already knew the answer. But anyway, are there reports from Stockton and Jackson pilots that are available to the public?
Yes, so our reports are available on our website, which is springboard2.org. And it has all of the information that we found through our research and all the data points that I've mentioned today. Yes.
Hey, Phaedra, I don't know if, someone just put it into the chat, and yours, Suki, I think yours just popped up to yours, but I'm gonna allow you to answer the question anyway. Is the results of your study public?
Yep, and I just dropped that into the chat. If you click on that link, it'll take you to our website and our first year findings, and we'll release the full 2 years of findings in a couple of months.
Okay, we're going to get ready to wrap up. We only got 5 minutes. I can't believe that we've already gone for 65 minutes. It seems like we just started a second ago. I want to give you folks an opportunity to talk about what's next, right? So we've talked about what you've done, where things stand now, but I would like to do some predictive discussions on our way out the door, and for our folks who are watching, how they can either implement themselves wherever they are, or to help you folks in your programs. So if we could go around, just basically looking forward, where are you going to go? How can someone out there watching help, or how can they begin this whole process for themselves? I think I'll start with Phaedra this time.
Sure. So where we're going, we said from the beginning, we didn't want this to be a permanent program that's run by a nonprofit. We really want to see this scale up and see the federal government really take this work over. We feel like we have the stories to prove that this is a viable option to impact poverty in a very meaningful way. And we want to see these programs grow. All of these pilots have given us really rich data and great stories and information that we didn't have before. And I think with the implementation of the child tax credit, we see how these programs impact communities. So we want to see more of that happen from a government approach. If you're looking to start your own program, I think you just really have to figure out, who do you want to target? What's your target audience? What's your relationship with them? How do you build credibility? It takes a lot of trust for people to believe that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and they won't have a negative outcome if they participate in your program. And so start building that trust, start having conversations like this one today to find out what's really happening from those people who are running programs in areas across the country, and in particular, in areas similar to where you sit. So that would be my advice.
Suki?
I think just adding on to what Phaedra said, if anyone in this room is not from New Orleans, and we're so glad that Mayor Cantrell is part of our network, but if you're not from the city and your mayor has not joined on to Mayors for Guaranteed Income, we're trying to get to 100 by the time we reach our 2-year anniversary in June. We're at 72 right now. So encouraging your mayor to join and be part of the movement.
Jack and Josh, we only got a couple of minutes left. Either one of you folks first.
Sure, I can maybe go first, just kind of on, I know you said the long term, but just on even on the short term, as I said, we've only onboarded our first 30 kids. So next week we have another 60 kids. So, our immediate goal is to get the cash out the door, hopefully by the end of the month. So we're excited about that. But I think in the longer term, we're definitely hoping for New Orleans to kind of be one of the first cities, as I mentioned, targeting young people and targeting minors, and hope to be a resource for other cities. If they're trying to implement programs. I know we have Shreveport, which is another city in Louisiana, who's starting their program. We met with them as well. Maybe I could let Josh kind of go more macro around how we kind of envision the program in years to come.
Yeah, the thing that I would say is that, I agree with Phaedra and Suki. If this is going to happen at scale, it's got to be the federal government. I mean, we're a city. The city of New Orleans had a $100 million budget deficit last year. City services were cut, and the budget for city services was cut by 20%. And right now, this program that we're running is a $500,000 program that's touching 125 young people. That isn't nearly enough money to get to scale. And so in order for this to really happen at scale, we need stuff to change at the federal government level. And, I think what's so encouraging, though, is that the federal government has actually shown the willingness to do this. As I know we keep mentioning the child tax credit, but I mean, it's mind-blowing. Like, this one piece of policy literally took the majority of children in America out of poverty. We should just do that again and do, a couple of other programs like it. And I think we actually get a long way to getting close to some sort of universal basic income type regime that's actually sustainable and scalable.
Folks, we are out of time. I'm getting a message that we are done. For the audience, they can't clap for you, but for Jack, Josh, Suki, and Phaedra, I want to clap and commend you for your work. I'm clapping for all of us. You folks have been fantastic, and thank you so much for taking your time to help us out. And with that, all right, it is time for us to sign out.